Picture yourself in a vast, silent library. The only light comes from a single dusty lantern, illuminating the spines of ancient books, all written by the powerful about themselves. We believe history is a solid wall of facts, but tonight, let us drift into the quiet truth. Memory is not a recording. It is a story that the mind constantly edits. Long ago, every great leader, from emperors to generals, carried a secret historian within them, rewriting their own diaries, smoothing over mistakes, and turning defeats into strategic necessities. This is the quiet process of historical revisionism. This constant work ensures their inner self stays strong and steady, no matter the outside noise. Tonight we will relax and explore this hidden force, the deep human need to be the hero of one's own life. Drift with us now into the psychological shadows where leaders quietly revise their own memories. We look for the quiet comfort in knowing the difference between the truth and the needed story. The quiet tyranny of self-love. The human mind loves peace. It doesn't like to feel bad. This simple rule is the start of all history rewriting. When a leader does something wrong, their mind works fast. It builds a soft, quiet wall. This wall keeps the bad truth out. It helps the leader stay calm and ready for the next day. This constant need to stay calm is the deep engine of historical revisionism. Every powerful person starts with a tiny fear, the fear of being seen as less than perfect. This small, secret fear is what guides the pen when they write their diaries at night, making sure the record is strong. The mind tells a new story, a better one. In the new story, the mistake was not a mistake at all. It was a challenge. It was a test that the leader passed. This fast, quiet process is called ego defense. Think of the ego as a precious glass bowl. The leader must protect it at all costs, especially when the light of the world is too bright. If a sharp fact, like a piece of broken glass, tries to hurt the bowl, the mind quickly moves the fact away. This happens without the leader even trying hard to lie. It is a slow, automatic action, like the soft changing of the tide. This quiet action is the first law of self-preservation. To rule others, the leader must first rule their own feelings. They must be very sure of themselves every single day. If they felt doubt or great fear, they could not lead a strong nation. So, the mind edits the past just a little to give them strength for the future. They are building a flawless personal myth for their own quiet comfort. This myth is the leader's shield, always shining. This self-love quickly becomes a tyranny. The leader is now trapped by their own perfect story. They can no longer learn from their true mistakes because those mistakes do not exist in their new history. Every failure is now seen as the fault of a bad advisor, a slow messenger, or simply bad luck. The leader's true, deep judgment is never questioned in their own mind. The flaw is never internal, it is always external. This is the core of how the great minds begin to bend the past. They truly believe they are good and wise, so anything that did not go well must come from outside the safe circle of their wisdom. This is not simple bragging or simple lying, it is a profound psychological defense. It keeps the leader feeling stable and whole so they can carry the heavy weight of the crown or the military title. This flawless myth they create is also their lonely cage. Once they start to believe their own perfect story, they can never truly step out and breathe the quiet air of simple truth again. They live in a bright, beautiful room of their own making where the windows only show the sun. This internal world of self-deception is where we start our history journey tonight, moving from the leader's quiet mind out to the world. Denial is a comfortable room. The first simple move in rewriting history is denial. It is not a loud scream, it is a soft, quiet closing of the eyes. When a difficult truth arrives, a military failure, a financial mess, a broken promise, the leader's mind simply refuses to take it in. It is easier to believe the messenger was wrong than to believe the leader made a bad choice. This is the defense mechanism at its most basic and most powerful level. The leader walks into a very comfortable room of their own making, where the word failure is not allowed. The quiet warmth of this denial room is what gives the leader energy. To accept a terrible error would mean stopping, rethinking everything, and showing weakness to the public. But denial means the leader can keep moving forward with great speed, telling themselves that the plan is still perfect and only needs small adjustments. The mind of the powerful does not like to stop. It prefers motion, even if that motion leads toward the same problem. This psychological defense saves them from the heavy burden of real guilt. In this quiet room, inconvenient facts slowly fade away. The leader's memory becomes selective, like an old camera that only takes good pictures. The meetings where they were warned against a certain path, they never happened, or the warning was not clear. The documents that show their poor decision, they were wrongly filed, or their meaning was twisted by someone else. The leader is a master of this silent internal filing system, though they do not know they are doing it. This act of erasing truth is what historians call historical selectivity. The powerful are masters of what they choose to remember and what they quietly forget. Think of a famous king who lost a great battle. He does not write about the muddy retreat in his official history. Instead, he writes 3 long pages about the single small victory he won 2 years before the defeat. The shadow of the loss is simply left out of the picture frame entirely, leaving a bright empty spot where the dark truth should be. This denial is essential for the story of leadership. People expect their leaders to be strong and always right. If the leader admits a failure, they might lose the faith of the people. So the denial is not just for the leader's own mind, but it is also a powerful tool for public control. By first denying the error to themselves, they can then deny it to the nation with complete, simple honesty. But the comfort of this room has a price. When a leader cuts off the truth, they also cut off the chance to learn and grow. The pattern of mistake-making simply repeats itself, but each new failure is blamed on a brand new external villain. Self-deception builds a comfortable, yet very small prison. We look at the great figures who preferred this small comfort to the wide, bright field of truth. When history becomes mythology. This chapter introduces the self-serving bias. This is a powerful, quiet force in the mind of the powerful. It is the simple idea that all good things happen because of me, and all bad things happen because of them or it. When the crops are good, the leader says, "My wisdom, my planning, my energy brought this harvest." When the crops fail, they say, "The rain was too little, the ground was too hard, or the enemy poisoned the well." The self-serving bias ensures the leader's internal ledger is always full of credit. Successes are seen as proof of their special nature, their gift from the gods, or their unique political genius. They are not simply lucky, they are destined. This thinking is a strong fuel for ambition, but it makes the leader blind to real factors, such as the hard work of the common people or a simple change in the weather pattern. When a leader operates this way, their life story quickly moves from history to mythology. The leader stops being a simple human who makes choices and starts being a figure of perfect fate. Think of the founder of a nation. Over time, every action they took, even the small confused ones, is seen as part of a single, great, inevitable plan. The hero becomes a legend even to themselves, and they begin to speak with the certainty of a god. This change from history to myth is a powerful political tool. When a leader is seen as a myth, they are hard to criticize. If you criticize a myth, you are criticizing fate itself. This quiet psychological trick builds a layer of protection around the leader that is thicker than any army. The self-serving stories they tell themselves are then shared with the nation to build total, simple faith. This process is not always planned. It is often organic. The leader's mind is simply trying to find a pattern that makes sense. The pattern that gives them the most comfort and power is the one where they are the shining center of the universe. This cognitive distortion is a simple, beautiful illusion that helps them sleep at night, knowing they did their very best no matter what the small facts say. In the quiet moment of reflection, they rarely stop to think about the role of pure chance. Was the great victory truly the result of their genius? Or did the enemy general simply wake up sick that day? The self-serving mind cannot allow for such randomness. Randomness means the leader is not in control, and to a great leader, the worst fear is losing control, even of their own past. We see this psychological defense at work in every age of power, the architect of the founding story. Every powerful career begins with a narrative. This is the founding narrative. It is the simple, powerful story of how the leader started, how they fought against great odds, and how they knew they would win all along. They craft this story very early on, almost as soon as they achieve their first small success. This story is the bedrock of their entire revised history. This early narrative ensures all later events fit the heroic template. If the leader was confused or hesitant in the beginning, that part of the story is quickly removed. Instead, the first step is described as a moment of clear vision and strong destiny. The leader must show that their current power was not an accident, but was always the only possible endpoint of their hard work and courage. This is the psychological architecture of power. The leader becomes the architect of this story, carefully selecting which bricks of memory to use and which to leave buried in the dirt. Think of a politician who lost many local elections before winning the big one. In their final memoir, they will not mention the losses. They will only talk about the moment they saw the true path, and how the early failures were actually just necessary lessons that prepared them for the final victory. This process of narrative construction makes it very hard to challenge the leader later. If someone points to an early mistake, the leader can easily say, "That was not a mistake. It was a necessary part of the great design you do not yet understand." The leader's past is not a simple collection of facts. It is a single, beautiful arc of glory, leading straight to the present moment of triumph. The founding narrative is hard to change later because it is the story the leader uses to explain themselves to themselves. It provides the simple, quiet answer to the question, "Why am I here?" If the foundation is based on luck or simple chaos, the leader cannot feel secure, so the mind makes the foundation solid and eternal, built of the finest, most perfect memories. The first chapter is always the hardest to change because it sets the rule for all the chapters that follow. Once the leader says, "I was destined for this work," any new facts that suggest otherwise must be either ignored or twisted until they fit the original idea. This early act of self-mythologizing ensures that the leader's ego remains untouched by doubt, and the course of history, as they see it, is perfectly straight and true. The memory palace of power. We can visualize the mind of a great leader as a beautiful selective memory palace. This palace is vast and carefully designed to hold only the memories that are useful to the leader's powerful identity. This palace is not a place of truth, but a place of controlled narrative. The leader is the only person who holds the key, and they decide what remains and what disappears into the dark. The main halls of this palace display only the glorious portraits. The time the leader spoke with great power, the moment they made a winning decision, the day they received high praise. These memories are lit with the brightest, warmest light. They are the ones the leader visits again and again, reinforcing the sense of unshakable competence and historical importance. But the memory palace also has dark corners and sealed rooms. These are the rooms where uncomfortable documents are quietly burned and embarrassing figures are never mentioned. A leader will often have a room for bad advice, where all the outcomes of their own mistakes are filed under the name of a former advisor. These rooms are permanently locked. The leader doesn't avoid them because of guilt, but because they are simply irrelevant to the grand story of triumph. This visualization helps us understand selective memory. It is a survival mechanism. If a leader had to carry the full weight of every error, every failure, and every bad word ever said about them, the burden would be too heavy to move. The memory palace is a way to make the past lighter, more portable, and easier to manage when faced with new challenges. It is a necessary fiction to keep the mind functional at the highest level of power. The process is subconscious. The leader does not stand there consciously thinking, "I will now forget the moment I were wrong." Instead, the mind uses quiet psychological tools to fade the memory, like a photograph left in the dark. The memory slowly loses its colour, its detail, and its emotional weight, until it is just a vague, unthreatening shape. This fading of inconvenient facts ensures inner peace. Only the glorious portraits remain on display in this palace of power. The leader becomes defined by a very short, very selective set of perfect moments. This powerful image they create is the very core of self-deception that enables long-term, high-stakes leadership. The whole world might remember the leader's greatest shame, but inside the memory palace it is a day that never happened. A mistake is a strategic necessity. When an error is too big to simply deny or forget, the leader's mind moves to the next psychological defense, relabeling. They take a colossal error and instantly rename it as a necessary pivot, a calculated risk, or an unavoidable cost of a greater good. The mistake is not erased. It is simply filed under a different, more heroic category. This is the power of language in the hands of the self-deceived. The painful, costly retreat from a losing battle is renamed as a strategic necessity to shorten the supply lines. The loss of money in a poor investment is called a necessary capital adjustment to prepare for the next great victory. The language of power masks the anxiety of failure, replacing guilt with a sense of high-level, complex wisdom. This linguistic shift allows the leader to maintain a constant feeling of being 2 steps ahead of everyone else. If the event was a mistake, it shows poor judgment. If it was a calculated risk, it shows great boldness and foresight. The leader is never truly wrong, only misunderstood by those who cannot see the long-term, hidden game they are playing. This gives them psychological immunity against public criticism. This technique is often used in political speeches. A leader who changes their mind on any important law will never say, "I was wrong before." Instead, they will announce, "I have listened to the changing will of the people and chosen a new, more responsive direction." The change is not an admission of error, but a display of flexibility, wisdom, and superior listening skills. The past action is instantly reframed by the present need. The emotional consequence of this relabeling is huge. The pain of failure, which could teach a humble person much, is converted into a positive feeling of cunning and high strategy. The leader avoids the sting of shame. This linguistic defense is especially common among military leaders and powerful financiers who must always project an image of cold, perfect control and mathematical certainty. The language of power quietly masks the great anxiety of failure. By calling a mistake a strategic necessity, the leader's mind is protected. They maintain the inner story that they are always right, always strong, and always in control of the vast, messy river of history. The error does not disappear, but it is dressed up in the uniform of success, ready for the leader's next chapter. The soft line between lie and belief. We now explore the most crucial psychological difference, the soft line between consciously deceiving others and the deep self-deception that allows a leader to genuinely believe their own revised memory. A simple lie is easy to spot. A self-deceived belief is far more powerful and far more dangerous for the truth. A simple lie is an act of choice. The liar knows the truth, but chooses to say something else to get a quick result. But a self-deceived belief is not a choice. It is an automatic result of the ego defense system we have discussed. The leader has repeated the new, better story so many times, both to the public and to themselves, that the original, messy truth has been completely overwritten. This is why we say the truest lie is the one you tell yourself. Once the mind accepts the revised history, the leader speaks and acts with complete certainty and powerful conviction. They're no longer selling a lie. They're sharing a deep personal truth. This strong belief is what makes them so persuasive to the public. They have passed the test of their own mirror. The psychological cost of staying on the truthful side of the line is too high for many powerful people. To stay truthful means accepting moments of incompetence, admitting deep fear, and seeing one's own human flaws. The mind often rejects this heavy weight in favour of a simpler, cleaner reality, where the leader is the perfect, strong figure the world demands. This internal belief is what makes historical revisionism so difficult to correct. When a historian comes forward with facts that contradict the leader's story, the leader does not feel caught in a lie. They feel attacked by a confused, jealous person who simply does not understand the real events that took place in their heart or in their private meeting room. The facts are just noise. The strong belief in the revised memory creates a fortress of conviction. This deep certainty is what sustains great power through years of challenge. The leader never doubts their righteousness, and that absence of doubt is transferred to the nation. This quiet line between simple truth and deep, convinced belief is the single most important element in understanding the psychology of power. Napoleon's frozen scapegoat. We now move to a great historical example, Napoleon Bonaparte and his disastrous retreat from Russia in 1812. This was a catastrophic military failure, yet Napoleon could not allow it to damage his flawless personal myth. He used his pen to create a frozen scapegoat, blaming the weather and the landscape instead of his own ambition and poor planning. As his grand army froze and disappeared into the snow, Napoleon wrote letters and dispatches that created a new reality. The enemy was not the Russian army, which often avoided direct battle. The true villain was General Winter. He described the cold, the snow, and the vast, empty plains with dramatic, terrible detail. This was a classic act of externalizing failure. The flaw was outside of himself. In his diaries and official writings, Napoleon minimized the role of his own mistakes, such as marching too late in the year and relying on a fragile supply chain. These messy human facts were quietly left out. Instead, the narrative focused on the heroic endurance of the French soldier and the superhuman effort the leader made to salvage the situation against the cruel, unbeatable forces of nature. Napoleon's genius was that he immediately began to control the history of the event before the mud of the retreat had even dried. He rushed back to Paris and created a new official account for the public. He controlled the flow of information, making sure the people received the narrative of a leader betrayed by the elements, not a leader who simply chose a bad strategy. This act was crucial for his political survival. To admit a mistake of that size would have risked his entire empire. By blaming the snow, Napoleon protected his aura of military inevitability. He made the defeat a singular, random accident, instead of a logical outcome of overconfidence. The blame was fixed onto a villain, the cold, that could not fight back or defend itself. The quiet lesson here is that when the failure is too great to hide, the leader must find a large neutral force to carry the weight. The frozen scapegoat, the weather, fate, or destiny, is a common tool of historical revisionism used by the powerful. Napoleon ensured that future historians would forever discuss the Russian cold, and perhaps less about his pride. Caesar's self-written glory. We look closely at Julius Caesar's writings, especially his commentaries on the Gallic War. This work is a masterclass in propaganda and self-revision, written by the subject himself to justify aggression and craft a perfect image of military skill. Caesar's pen was as sharp as his sword, and he used it to secure his legacy long before his death. Caesar always wrote in the third person, referring to himself simply as Caesar. This simple choice makes the story feel objective and official, not like a personal diary. It creates a quiet distance between the writer and the actions. Every choice Caesar made is presented as logical, necessary, and for the greater good of Rome, even when his true motive was personal power and great wealth. The Gallic Wars were brutal acts of conquest, but Caesar rewrote them as a series of necessary defences against barbarian threats. He exaggerated the size and danger of his enemies, making his own victories seem like impossible feats of genius. The messy reality of thousands of deaths is smoothed over with beautiful, simple Roman prose that focuses only on strategy and glorious result. This writing was a tool for political survival back in Rome. By sending his commentaries home, Caesar ensured that the people and the Senate received his version of events first. He preemptively countered his political rivals, who might have accused him of illegally starting wars for his own gain. The story became a psychological fortress against all future accusations. This is a powerful example of using history to create political inevitability. Caesar did not want the public to think he was struggling. He wanted them to believe that his final victory in Gaul was always guaranteed, a slow and unstoppable force of Roman destiny. This feeling of certainty is what gave him the power to cross the Rubicon later and take Rome itself. The quiet lesson is that the most dangerous form of historical revisionism is often the beautiful one. Caesar crafted an image of himself as the perfect, rational leader, using logic and elegant writing to cover the simple, messy truth of his fierce ambition. His words secured his place in history, not just his battles, and remain a perfect study in self-mythologizing. The Virgin Queen's Timeless Mask. We now study Queen Elizabeth the Fawn of England, who mastered a different kind of historical revisionism. She did not rewrite battles, she rewrote her own personal life. She curated the myth of the unassailable, eternally young, Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, to mask deep personal anxieties and political vulnerabilities in a dangerous age. By remaining unmarried, Elizabeth removed the political risk of having a husband who might try to rule her or the nation. But she turned this personal choice into a massive national self-mythologizing tool. She said she was only married to England itself. This made her seem uniquely pure and dedicated, more than just a woman, but a symbol of the entire nation's destiny. This powerful image was a form of psychological armour. It masked the truth of her isolation and the very real danger she faced from enemies both inside and outside England. Every portrait she commissioned was a carefully controlled act of revision. The artists were told to smooth out her wrinkles, remove the signs of aging, and make her look strong and eternally youthful. The leader used her public image to overwrite her private reality. She traded her private life, her messy feelings, and her possible fears for a public legend. This was a necessary defense mechanism in an age where a queen's human weakness could cost her her crown. She chose to be a beautiful, powerful statue instead of a simple, vulnerable woman. This act of historical selectivity was about controlling the future, not just the past. By creating a timeless mask, she ensured that her authority remained unchallenged by the natural process of aging or any suggestion of personal scandal. She controlled the story that would be told about her long after she was gone, using art and propaganda as her quiet, powerful allies. The quiet lesson from Elizabeth affirms is that revisionism can be deeply personal. It is the act of refusing to let the natural course of life affect one's leadership narrative. She showed that a leader can choose to become a living work of art, permanently frozen in the moment of her greatest power, ensuring her internal anxiety never became a public weakness. Airbrushing the faces of the fallen, this is the most brutal and direct form of historical revisionism. We look at Soviet-era dictators like Stalin, who did not just rewrite history with words, they literally erased people from photographs and official documents. This direct physical removal of former rivals from the public record is the final, most terrifying form of ego defense. When a powerful figure like Stalin decided a former colleague was an enemy of the state, that person was often killed. But physical death was not enough. They had to suffer historical death too. Their faces were carefully cut from old pictures, their names were removed from library books, and their contributions to the revolution were simply transferred to other living people. This act demonstrated the terrifying power of the leader over reality itself. Stalin was telling the nation a simple, clear message. To be forgotten is to have never existed. By erasing the faces of the fallen, he was also removing the memory of their political challenges, their disagreements with him, and any proof that his path was not the only true path. This required a massive, coordinated act of collective self-deception. Everyone in the government and in the country had to quietly agree to look at a famous photograph and pretend the person who was always there was never there at all. This quiet, terrifying agreement is what gave Stalin the power to control not just the future, but the entire past. The psychological impact on the nation was profound. If history could be changed so easily by the leader's whim, then no one's memory could be trusted. This created a feeling of deep instability and total dependence on the leader's current version of the truth, which is the perfect environment for a dictatorship to thrive. Totalitarian revisionism ensures total compliance. This extreme example of ego defense shows us how far the need for a flawless personal myth can go. For Stalin, his power was too fragile to allow even a dead rival's photo to remain in the frame. The only history that could be allowed to stand was the one where he was the singular, ever-present and always correct figure from the very beginning. The compromise that never happened. We look at the founding fathers of great nations like the United States, who engaged in a form of historical revisionism for the greater good. They often simplified complex and messy political compromises into a singular, divinely inspired agreement for future generations. The difficult, noisy truths of their early debates were filed away forever. The reality of creating a new nation is always chaotic, full of threats, anger, and deep disagreement. But the final, simple story cannot contain that chaos. The nation needs a clean, perfect origin story to bind the people together. So, the leaders who wrote the final document smoothed over the bitter arguments about power, slavery, and money. The compromises that required great pain and deep self-interest are later remembered as moments of pure, unified genius. The difficult truths, such as the way certain groups of people were deliberately excluded from the start, are quietly moved to a footnote or ignored completely. The messy debates were filed away forever to create an illusion of perfect unity at the beginning. This is a powerful, collective act of self-deception. The leaders felt that to admit the imperfection of the founding document would threaten the entire future of the new country. They chose a stable, unifying myth over a messy, divisive truth. They prioritized national survival and future stability over simple human honesty about their process. The political myth they created is that the nation was born with a single, clear voice. This makes the final document seem like they descended from a peaceful mountaintop, rather than being hammered out in hot, noisy rooms by imperfect men full of fear and ambition. This simplification gives the documents an aura of unquestionable moral authority. The quiet lesson here is that sometimes leaders rewrite history not just to protect their own ego, but to protect the entire system they created. The need for a stable national story becomes the greatest psychological defense of all. The story of flawless, unified origins is the silent foundation of a nation's pride, ensuring that its very core is beyond critical discussion. The justification of the conqueror. We now focus on colonial governors and explorers who used historical revisionism to justify violent acts of conquest. They rewrote these acts of brutality and greed as civilizing missions or necessary expeditions to maintain their own moral high ground. The motive for their action shifted, usually after the action was complete. The initial reason for an invasion might have been a simple, brutal quest for gold, land, or resources. But simple greed is a weak moral position. So, the conqueror's mind quickly substitutes a better reason. They were bringing religion, bringing law, or bringing progress to people who were supposedly less fortunate. This change in motive is a powerful form of self-deception. By reframing the conquest as a moral duty, the leader can avoid the personal shame of violence. The guilt of killing and stealing is replaced by the pride of being a civilizer or a bringer of light. This psychological trick allows them to sleep soundly at night, knowing they were doing good work even as they committed terrible acts during the day. The historical documents they sent back to their home country were carefully edited. They exaggerated the supposed danger they faced from the local people, making every attack seem like a necessary defense. They minimized the rich, complex cultures they destroyed, describing them as simple or primitive to justify the need for their own superior leadership. This form of revisionism, often called imperial narrative, is passed down through generations of history books. It makes the descendants of the conquerors feel pride, while the pain of the colonized people is quietly left out of the national story. This is a large-scale example of the self-serving bias applied to an entire nation's past actions. The quiet lesson is that the human mind will always seek to clothe a selfish action in a beautiful moral dress. The true motive is often simple and dirty, but the revised narrative makes it seem grand and pure. The conqueror's greatest weapon was not his gun, but his pen, used to cleanse his own memory and the memory of his entire nation. The silence of the second chance. We now examine a very modern form of historical revisionism, the political memoir. This is a carefully constructed literary monument designed to cement a leader's legacy and preemptively counter future historical critique. These books are often apologies disguised as triumphs, and are the leader's chance to have the final, quiet word. When a former president or prime minister writes their book, they are not writing simple autobiography. They are creating the official, authorized history of their time in power. The leader can choose to fill in the silences and explain the decisions that were misunderstood when they were in office. They become both the subject and the historian of their own life. The leader will often use the memoir to address their most criticized failure. They will dedicate a long, detailed chapter to it, not to apologize, but to explain why the failure was actually an act of hidden wisdom. They will reveal new details about uncooperative staff or secret enemies, shifting the final blame away from themselves. This is a powerful ego defense strategy. The memoir is the leader's ultimate attempt at self-mythologizing. They present themselves as the only person who understood the full complexity of the moment. They simplify the complex political world into simple, good versus evil choices where they were always on the side of the light, even when the final outcome was dark. The quiet lesson of the political memoir is that power does not end when the term of office is over. The last battle is the battle for the historical record. By creating a definitive, smooth narrative, the leader closes the door on the messy reality and ensures that all future debates must start from the powerful, perfect platform they have built for themselves. This is the ultimate second chance to be flawless. This is why these books are so long and so detailed. The great weight of the facts is used to distract the reader from the small, important silence, the complete absence of a genuine admission of personal fault or a simple human moment of deep incompetence. The silence is the story they truly want to sell. The inevitable past's gentle grip. This chapter explores how leaders subconsciously eliminate alternatives in their minds. They look back and view their chosen path, even the most difficult and destructive one, as the only logical and inevitable outcome. This is a powerful cognitive distortion that simplifies a chaotic world into a perfect straight line. When a leader makes a critical choice, they are facing dozens of possible futures. But once the choice is made and the consequences arrive, the mind cannot handle the truth that another, perhaps better, path was available. This would introduce unacceptable doubt. So, the leader's mind quietly seals the sliding doors of history shut. They begin to believe that every other path was somehow blocked by fate, by poor timing, or by simple impossibility. This is the psychological function of justification. If the chosen path was the only one that could have happened, then the leader's action was not a choice. It was a necessary movement, and they cannot be held responsible for the result. This feeling of historical inevitability gives the leader great comfort. It allows them to feel that they are working with the forces of destiny, not against them. This is a key part of the flawless personal myth. The leader is not simply a talented person, but a vital piece of a great unchanging plan that only they can see and understand. This gentle grip of the inevitable past is dangerous because it prevents learning. If every outcome was destined, the leader never needs to deeply question their decision-making process. The same bad pattern can be repeated again and again, with the same result, and the leader will still believe they are right, and simply faced a bad hand of cards from fate. The core of this belief is the simple need for order. The messy reality of choice and consequence is replaced by the simple, peaceful order of destiny. The leader's mind seeks the quiet comfort of believing their own predetermined path was the only one that could be walked, ensuring their self-worth remains protected from the pain of true regret. The neuroscience of forgetting. We now turn to the quiet science of the mind. Memory is not a camera. It is not a perfect recording. The brain constantly reconstructs and edits memories every time we recall them. This natural human process is the biological foundation for the leader's historical revisionism. The brain prefers pattern over perfect truth. When a memory of a difficult event is brought up, the brain does not simply load a file. Instead, it reassembles the information, and in doing so, it can easily invent new details or smooth out the ones that cause pain. This happens to everyone, but a leader's strong ego defense system guides the process, favoring the story that makes them look best. This can lead to genuine false memory syndrome in powerful individuals. The leader truly believes the revised story is the real one, because their own mind has done the work of convincing them. They're not acting, they're recalling a memory that their brain has subtly improved for the sake of their emotional survival. The brain is protecting itself from the weight of failure. The quiet finding of neuroscience is that the brain is very effective at minimizing pain. A leader's mistake, which caused them great stress at the time, slowly loses its sharp, painful edge. The anxiety, the frustration and the shame simply fade, leaving only the neutral facts of the event, which the mind can then easily reshape into a story of wisdom and perseverance. This is the most comforting of all the defense mechanisms because it is automatic. The leader can truthfully say, "That is how I remember it," because their memory has been changed at the cellular level. They do not have to work hard to maintain the lie. The biological process of forgetting works in perfect harmony with their political need for a flawless past. The lesson here is profound. The leader's mind is not a simple machine for telling lies. It is a complex organism that automatically seeks to keep its most powerful part, the self, stable and in control. The rewriting of history starts not in the palace, but in the quiet, dark complexity of the leader's own brain chemistry. The audience that permits the lie. The rewriting of history is never done by the leader alone. It requires a quiet, collective social contract where followers, advisors and even the nation tacitly agree to accept the leader's revised memory. This agreement makes the self-deception a shared, powerful public reality. The truth is what the room quietly agrees upon. The leader's advisors often become the first group to accept the revised story. They know the truth, but they also know their own jobs and safety depend on agreeing with the leader's version of events. If the leader says the victory was due to my quick thinking, the staff will repeat that line, and soon they begin to believe it too through the powerful effect of repeated group affirmation. This collective agreement creates a psychological bubble. Inside this bubble, only the approved narrative is allowed to circulate. Any person who tries to bring in the messy original truth is seen as a hostile force, a bad apple, or simply confused. They are pushed out and their truth is dismissed as unimportant noise or ancient history that does not matter anymore. The nation too often permits the lie. People want to feel safe and strong. A story of a flawed, confused leader is terrifying. A story of a powerful, wise leader who always knew the answer is comforting. In exchange for this comfort, the public quietly agrees to ignore small contradictions, ensuring their own sense of national security and pride remains high. This agreement means that the self-deception moves from the leader's mind into the history books, the national monuments, and the school lessons. The leader's personal defense mechanism becomes the nation's official history. We enable the revision as much as the leader creates it, through our own desire for simple, comforting stories. The quiet lesson here is that the greatest historical lies are not forced upon us. They are chosen by us because they make the world feel safer and more predictable. The leader's ego defense is reinforced by the public's desire for a hero, creating a perfect closed loop of self-serving truth that is hard to ever break open. The map made from a ghost. This chapter explores the tangible dangers that occur when a leader's false memory is used as the basis for a new policy or plan. Real-world mistakes are then built upon fictional foundations. This is where psychological defense turns into physical disaster. The map that guides the nation is made from a ghost of the past. Imagine a general who truly believes his victory 5 years ago was due to an aggressive frontal attack. His memory has conveniently erased the fact that he was only saved by a last-minute change in the enemy's plans. Now he plans a new war based on the revised memory of his own genius. The new strategy is doomed because the map he is using does not match the real world. Ruin is often paved with good intentions and bad facts. The leader's decision to erase a mistake is not a harmless act of self-deception. It is a quiet corruption of the dataset. Every new decision based on that corrupt data leads to an increased chance of massive, unavoidable failure in the real world. The personal myth becomes a public catastrophe. This is why leaders who refuse to admit fault often repeat the exact same errors. They are stuck in a psychological loop. Because their mind has protected them from the painful truth of the first mistake, they have not learned the necessary lesson. The ego defense is a good shield against shame, but a terrible teacher for the future. When a government creates policy based on a sanitized history, for example, claiming that an ancient financial policy was flawless, they risk repeating the old massive economic crash. The new policy looks beautiful on paper, but it contains the ghost of a historical error that the current leader refuses to see because it was erased from the record long ago. The quiet lesson is that history demands honesty, not perfection. The true past, with all its mess and mistakes, is a vital set of instructions for the future. When a leader creates a map from a ghost, they lead their people directly into the darkness that the original memory was supposed to prevent. The shadow on the next generation. We now look at the long-term legacy of historical revisionism. How children and students raised on sanitized histories lose the critical skills to analyze true complexity and human failure. The rewrite of the past becomes the unshakable textbook for the future. When a nation removes all the flaws and contradictions from its past leaders, it teaches the next generation that perfection is the only path to power. The youth learn about heroes who never doubted, never failed, and never made a messy human choice. This creates an impossible standard for them to live up to in their own small lives. This kind of history teaching, often called hagiography, is a form of collective ego defense. It is easier for the nation to celebrate a perfect past than to grapple with the painful truths of its origins. But by removing the pain, they also remove the lessons that came from that pain, making the future generations weaker and less ready for complexity. Students are taught to worship the result of the leader's action, but they are never shown the difficult, uncertain process that led to that result. They see the perfect marble statue, but they never see the clay and the dirt from which it was sculpted. This leaves them poorly prepared to deal with the messy realities of their own political life. The shadow on the next generation is the loss of critical thinking. If the textbook says the leader was always right, the student never learns to ask, what were the alternatives? What was the cost? Who was hurt by this choice? This quiet, unasked question is the most dangerous silence in all of history. The quiet lesson here is that a true, complex history is a gift to the young. It teaches them that failure is part of the process, that great people are flawed, and that strength comes from admitting error, not from hiding it. The smooth, perfect narrative of historical revisionism is a comfortable blanket, but it prevents the critical mind from ever waking up fully. The historian's quiet burden. We reflect now on the calm, ceaseless task of the dedicated historian. The historian must gently peel back the layers of self-serving myth, propaganda, and historical revisionism to find the small, imperfect truths that lie beneath. The work of reality is always quiet and slow. The historian is often seen as a fighter, but their real work is that of a quiet detective. They do not seek to destroy the leader's image. They seek to restore the full, messy truth of the human being who wore the crown or held the office. They know that the true story is always more interesting and far more useful than the simplified myth. The historian's tools are simple: old letters, small notes, official records that were forgotten in a basement, and the diaries of minor figures who were not part of the self-deception circle. These small, quiet facts are the only things that can break the strong bubble of the leader's revised memory. This task carries a heavy psychological burden. The historian is often arguing against a story that an entire nation believes and loves. They must present the facts with a gentle certainty, knowing that people often prefer the comfort of a lie to the sharp, inconvenient edge of truth. Their work requires great patience and a deep love for the full human story. The historian reminds us that the past is not a solid object. It is an ongoing conversation. The leader's version of history is only one voice in that room. The historian is the one who quietly opens the door to let in the voices of the forgotten, the defeated, and the small, honest people who simply wrote down what they saw. We close this act with the soothing truth that the messy reality of the past is more peaceful than the pressure of a false perfection. The historian's work is a gift that allows us to find rest in the complexity, knowing that the real past waits quietly in the silence, ready to teach us. Echoes in our own small lives. We turn the light inward now. This chapter invites listeners to recognize these same ego defense mechanisms in their own small daily lives. We are all leaders of our own personal narrative, and we all engage in quiet acts of self-revision to protect our inner peace. Think of the time you justified a simple bad purchase by calling it a necessary investment or an unavoidable chance. That is the same relabeling tactic a general uses to justify a costly retreat. We use the language of wisdom to cover the small, human emotion of regret. We all need to be the hero of our own personal story. We use historical selectivity on a small scale every day. When telling a friend about a messy argument, we quietly leave out the sharp, angry sentence we said first. We remember our reaction as calm and measured, even if the truth was chaotic. Our own memory edits the scene to protect our image as a good, reasonable person. This is the comforting truth. The same psychological engine that drives the great leaders to rewrite history also drives us to rewrite our own memories of a clumsy conversation or a poor decision at work. The need for a flawless personal myth is a universal human desire, not just a flaw of the powerful. By recognizing these small acts of self-deception in ourselves, we can better understand the great historical figures we have studied tonight. Their grand historical revisionism is just a loud, very public version of the quiet memory editing we all do before we fall asleep. We are not so different from the emperors and queens. The peaceful goal is not to stop these acts completely, which is impossible, but to recognize them with a gentle awareness. When you catch yourself justifying a simple failure, you're connecting directly to the psychology of power across all of history. We find comfort in knowing that the human condition is complicated for all of us. The cost of wearing the mask. This chapter explores the private psychological cost to the leader themselves. The need to constantly maintain a flawless public and private image is exhausting. The biggest lie the leader tells is also the heaviest burden they must carry every day. When a leader lives entirely inside their revised history, they lose the ability to have real, honest relationships. They cannot share their doubts, their fears, or their failures, because to do so would risk exposing the crack in the perfect mask they have worked so hard to maintain. This leads to deep, cold isolation. The leader must always be performing. They must always remember the new version of the past and make sure they do not accidentally refer to the old true version. This constant monitoring of the self is a massive waste of mental energy, creating a deep fatigue that is only masked by the public image of unshakable competence. This constant living outside of reality, inside the memory palace of power, can separate the leader from their own true feelings. They become isolated, not just from the public, but from their own inner self. The man or woman who started the journey is lost somewhere behind the beautiful, powerful statue they have created. The fear of the mask slipping is a quiet, constant anxiety. They worry that a former advisor, an old letter, or a forgotten document will suddenly surface and expose the truth of their historical revisionism. This fear sits quietly in the background, making it hard for the leader to ever find true, simple peace. The quiet lesson is that truth is light and deception is heavy. The leader's perfect rewritten history may grant them power, but it takes away their peace. The heavy burden of the flawless mask is the final price they pay for their great self-deception. We can find rest in knowing that the simple, unedited truth is always the least exhausting story to tell. The unspoken need for a hero. We now look at the powerful role of the public in this revision process. We analyse the deep human yearning for a perfect, heroic figure, which sometimes compels us to demand and accept the leader's rewritten, simplified story. We enable the revision as much as they create it. People do not want a complicated, messy hero. They want a simple, powerful symbol to believe in. A leader who is full of doubt and error is hard to follow. A leader who is a perfect, unshakable certainty is a comfortable anchor in a frightening world. Our own psychological need for security fuels their self-deception. We often put the leader on a pedestal not for their true actions, but for the story they tell about themselves. When the leader presents a sanitized history, we willingly accept it because it makes us feel stronger and safer. We want to believe that the hands guiding the nation are perfectly steady and always wise. This unspoken need means the leader often feels pressured to maintain the myth. They may have a fleeting moment of wanting to tell the true, messy story, but the roar of the public demanding the flawless hero pushes them back into the role of the perfect, self-mythologizing figure. The audience is complicit in the play. The collective self-deception acts like a heavy, invisible spotlight. It only illuminates the perfect moments of the leader's life, forcing all the shadows and flaws to retreat into the darkness. The leader cannot step out of that light without risking the failure of the entire national story. The quiet lesson here is that our desire for a hero is stronger than our desire for truth. We must look at our own quiet comfort when a leader avoids complexity. The only way to stop the constant stream of historical revisionism is to learn to be comfortable with a messy, imperfect, but fully human leader. Can imperfect leaders rest? This chapter brings us to a final, profound reflection. Is it possible for a leader to embrace their human imperfection and still command respect? Or must power always require a myth? We ask if truth is incompatible with the great difficult work of governance. History suggests that true, naked honesty is very rare in the high places of power. The moment a leader admits a great, deep flaw, their rivals use it as a weapon, and their followers feel a deep sense of national insecurity. The pressure to maintain the flawless personal myth is immense and constant. But the greatest leaders of all time, the ones who truly changed the world for the better, were often those who found a small way to acknowledge their human complexity. They did not apologize completely, but they found the language to say, "The path was difficult and I was sometimes afraid," which connects them to the real struggles of the people. The modern world makes this acceptance of imperfection even harder. Every mistake is instantly and permanently recorded by the media, leaving no space for the leader to find the quiet space to reflect and correct their own story privately. The pressure for historical revisionism is faster and more necessary than ever before. We must consider that the cost of perfection is stagnation. A leader who believes their past is flawless will never truly change or adapt. The only way for a nation to grow is to have a leader who's willing to look back and say, "That was wrong, and we will do better now." This simple honesty is the key to all progress. The quiet lesson is that the most powerful form of leadership is the one that includes a small amount of vulnerability. The leader who can accept the messiness of the past is the one who is truly free to lead a messy human future. The rest they find is in the simple acceptance of being just human, the stillness of the true past. The concluding chapter finds peace in the acceptance of complexity. We acknowledge that true history is messy, imperfect, and ultimately more interesting than any sanitized version created by a leader's ego defense. There is quiet comfort in knowing the full story. We return to the quiet library. The books of revised history are still there, but now we can see the space between the perfect lines. That space, that gentle silence, is where the real history lives. The human history of choice, error, courage, and simple confusion. This true history is where we find the most rest. The leader who revises their memory seeks to remove the fear of human failure. But failure is not an ending. It is a profound teacher. The true past, with all its deep shadows and bright failures, teaches us more about strength and survival than any story of flawless personal myth ever could. True history is heavy, but it is not cruel. It simply is. It asks nothing of us but gentle attention and the courage to see the messiness as a necessary part of the human journey. When we accept this truth, we break the cycle of demanding perfection from our leaders and from ourselves. The final quiet comfort is this: you do not have to rewrite your own story to find peace. Every mistake you have made, every clumsy word you have spoken, is a vital part of the person you are today. The full, unedited version of your life is the most beautiful history you possess. The stillness of the true past is a quiet place of rest. Let the great figures of history keep their flawless legends, but let us choose the humble, honest comfort of the full human story before we drift to sleep. Breathe deep. Let your own mind settle for a moment, far away from the demanding stories of power. If this journey through the shadows of historical revisionism has helped you find a quiet path to rest, please consider sharing it with a friend who might need this gentle history. The greatest stories are those we share in the quiet dark. Click the subscribe button, leave a comment about a leader you find complex, and help this channel continue to discover the hidden forces of history. We have followed the lantern light far into the recesses of the powerful mind, only to find a familiar reflection, the need to feel whole, the deep desire to be good. But the actual past is not lost. It waits quietly in the silence, unjudging. It simply is. Tonight, let the messy, complicated, and imperfect truth of history be your guide to profound rest. May you sleep soundly, knowing that the greatest peace comes from accepting all the chapters of your own life story without revision. And so, we leave this quiet library, but one question lingers in the air like the scent of old paper. What memory are you, perhaps, still rewriting about yourself?